Welcome to Speedrunner Reviews. In this series I'll be analysing games using the mindset of speedrunning. This video will look at the game from three perspectives. First, the casual experience, which is how most people will first play the game. Next, we'll discuss the speedrunning experience, including all the interesting tech and how well the game holds up as a speed game. Finally, we'll look at the tool-assisted speedrun, showing what the game looks like when pushed to the theoretical limit. If you already know the game and want to jump straight to the speedrun part, I've left timestamps in the description. Today we're going to get into the holiday spirit and do something a little bit different. We're looking at a ROM hack of Banjo-Kazooie. This is called How the Gruntch Stole Christmas, and essentially it takes the Banjo characters and puts them into the story of the Grinch. Now this may actually be my favourite Banjo-Kazooie ROM hack because it's so well polished and it's lots of fun. Now, some of the reason why this hack is so good comes towards the end, so this review is going to get pretty spoilery pretty quick. If you haven't played this ROM hack before, I'd highly recommend pause the video and have a go at it now. Of course, be sure to drop a sub first. Now, of course, the first thing you might notice when playing this hack is this really well polished intro sequence. They have you hold right on the joystick, so I think something's going on where Banjo's walking around behind the scenes and it plays through the intro. But you get launched into Banjo's house in what looks like Spiral Mountain, but it's not Spiral Mountain, this is Whoville. So the game consists of two levels. First level is Whoville, this one here, and then the second level is Gruntch's lair itself. Now, Whoville itself is very well polished, but it's not the main reason that I like this hack. It's essentially a pretty standard level. It's got 10 jiggies and 100 notes, and to move on to the next level, Gruntch's lair, you need to get 8 out of those 10 jiggies. Now, this is a ROM hack by Mark Kirko, and their hacks are well known for putting a lot of cool little features in. So just going around Nabnut's house here, you can see how many cool little bits and pieces there are, like an Xbox and a Diddy Kong Racing poster. There's always like little game cartridges scattered around the game everywhere and just so many Easter eggs. The other thing that I really like they did with this hack is they made jiggies so that you don't have a jiggy jig at the end. It almost works like jiggies do in Banjo-Tooie. Though later down the track in the Tazzing section we'll see that actually does cause some issues. They reuse assets from various bits of Banjo-Kazooie itself. You might have noticed the present smashing there. They've just reused the huts from Mumbo's Mountain to make that happen. And with the trend of reusing stuff, they also have these bags of presents, I think they're supposed to be. These are just reused versions of Blubber's gold. And Blubber conveniently is in here ready to give us a G for handing back those bags of presents. Again, with the reusing trend, we have Boggy's kids. For some reason there's 5 of them now, and that's because they reused the Jinjos to make that happen. So there's lots of things that you have to collect in this level. It's not a very short level for that reason, but we've got those presents, which I believe are modelled off of Nabnut's acorns. And then we've got other presents to collect. We've got those bags of presents we saw before. You got Mumbo tokens, you got everything. In fact, weirdly enough, you need 5 Mumbo tokens to transform here, but Mumbo just gives you a Jiggy instead of transforming you. Kind of a cool decision, I reckon, because that way you just play the whole game as Banjo. They have a really cool section in this other area here where Chimpy has buried all of their oranges underground, and you have to look at this map to know where to dig up those oranges. So if you sort of go around and follow that map, you'll eventually pull up oranges that look like that. You get a lovely G if you get all those oranges here. It's a pretty cool design. I actually can't figure out how they did it. I'm not sure what G they based it on in the real game. Now, I have a really cool way of hard forcing you to get some notes here. That's an 80 note door. And if you go in here, you just get a bunch of goodies. But really importantly, there's a Jiggy in here, there's a Jinjo in here, and there's one of the bags of groceries or whatever it is in here. And those are tied to 3 different Jiggies. Since you need 8 out of 10 Jiggies to progress through, you actually need to go into this room to progress through to the rest of the game. So it's really cool that they were able to actually force those notes onto you, because later on in the game we need 150 notes to finish the whole thing. Anyway, we go through, we clean up the rest of the level, we give Bottles his lovely groceries, and then that's pretty much what this level has to offer. Once you've done what you need to in this level, you talk to Naughty, you pay him 8 jiggies to spawn a Christmas tree on the map, and that gives us access to the next level. And the next level is where this game is going to get really, really fun. So for whatever reason, with the Christmas tree spawned here, it activates a warp on Banjo's bed in Banjo's house. And if you jump onto this bed, that's the one way to get through to the next level, which is Gruntch's lair. Pretty interesting way to do it, I suppose, but might have been a technical reason they had to do it like that. We get another wonderful cutscene with the Gruntch. Unfortunately, these cutscenes aren't skippable, so it can be a bit frustrating doing a speedrun. They're not that long though. So the premise of this section is that Grunty has claimed she's going to give back all the presents and make right. Her heart has grown 2 sizes, and we're going to go to her lair to go and collect the presents. Unfortunately, being Grunty, that is not the case. She completely ambushes us and puts us in prison. We get caught by the 2 gruntlings there and get stuck in prison. Now, as I said, this is where the game gets really, really fun. Grunty's lair is like an expanded version of what Grunty's lair was in Banjo-Kazooie. It's got lots of puzzles and little nooks and crannies, secret passages, everything. It's amazing. It's sort of, as a kid playing Banjo-Kazooie, we used to go and just look around Grunty's lair for secrets and passages and hidden things. We never found anything, of course. But in this game, it sort of scratches that itch of like, oh, maybe there is more to Grunty's lair, let's explore. So it's really cool to see that actually come to life properly. So once you're broken out of prison, you basically just make your way up Grunty's lair. They have a really cool thing where they've reused most of the witch switches in the game, and the witch switches serve various purposes across the lair. So this is an example of a witch switch on Grunty's eye there. You're not really supposed to know that that one's there until you see a hint later on in the lair, but if you know some of these ones in advance, you can almost just like sequence break it and then do the lair much faster than you otherwise could. I think the big thing I'll stress here though is patience. If you come in here just wanting a platformer to grind through, it's going to take a bit longer than that actually. Another little hidden switch here just for fun. I'll try not to spoil too much of the puzzles in the lair, but if you play through the game, you'll be able to see a lot of hints like that one there showing the barrel jiggy. But let's just say this lair stuff gets really, really cool. In fact, it's so cool that even Grabber makes an appearance, and you need to bring your speed shoes all the way across the lair to get him. One thing that I really like doing with these hacks is figuring out what original things in the game they used to make the new things. For example, these presents. You'll never guess what they modeled the presents off of with their behavior. And we'll talk about the very end of the game here, so just be aware for spoiler reasons. It has a really cool premise for ending the game. You got to go through this door to Grunty, which you need 150 notes for. But you go up to her and she's like asleep in her bedroom. And believe it or not, they've modeled this whole section off of the Napper section in Mad Monster Mansion. So you have to creep very slowly across the floor and try and avoid waking Grunty up. The only awkward thing about this section is that sometimes on various flashcards or emulators, I've had it be kind of glitchy in various different ways. So sometimes Grunty just catches you, regardless of if you're creeping or not. Other times I've had somehow the catching disabled, so I've been able to jump all around the room and check it out without waking up Grunty. So I'm not really sure why that happens, but this footage, which is coming from real console, I was able to do it in the intended way through Grunty's room. In fact, ending the run on this section definitely makes it very tense for something like a 100% speedrun or something. Alright, once you get to the end of Grunty's section, you open up something called the back door. So it needs another 8 jiggies to do that, and it just opens this door. This is sort of near where we went into Grunty's room before. And all you need to do to get through the game is just go through this back door and hit the presents at the end. That warps you through to sort of like the credits cutscene there. So as I'm sure you can imagine, if we found a way to get into that back door without opening, that would be very, very good for something like a speedrun. So realistically, this game's maybe a 20-30 minute experience once you know what you're doing, but the first time you play it, you can expect to spend a couple of hours just figuring out everything and how it all works. Really would recommend this ROM hack casually. And of course, I'll leave a link in the description for the download. Alright, now we're moving on to looking at the speedrun section of this. I was able to find 2 speedruns online, this top one in 26:51 and then underneath my record in 22:13. We'll be looking at the 22:13 today. As far as I can tell, nobody's run any percent for this game, but when we look at the TAS later, that will be of the any percent category. So in talking about the speed tech in this game, I'm going to try not to focus too much on the speed tech that comes across from vanilla Banjo-Kazooie. That'll be a topic for another video, but that video will be an absolute behemoth to make. But in short, basically just moving around in Talon Trot, jumping where you can to go a little bit faster, and rather than leaving Talon Trot normally, just pecking out of Talon Trot. That's the heart of the movement tech here, really. One thing that makes this game pretty interesting to speedrun is the changes to the camera system. In vanilla Banjo-Kazooie, you press the C buttons to snap the camera just, maybe 15-20 degrees at a time. But in this game, you can hold the C buttons to rotate it slowly. This is similar to how the camera works in Xbox Banjo-Kazooie rather than N64. It's a nice addition, but it does take a bit of getting used to, especially if you got muscle memory from the original game. There's not too much interesting I need to comment on in this level. Essentially, we've just routed out the 10 jiggies for 100% and 100 notes as efficiently as we can, and it does actually take quite a while because of all these collecting side quests. There are a few bits and pieces that make it faster, for example, getting Chimpy's oranges without actually looking at the map. Apart from that, we're really just looking at 10 minutes of solid platforming to get through this first level of Whoville. Now we move on to the Gruntch's lair section, which gets really fun to route out in a speedrun. Of course, we save a lot of time by knowing where a lot of these switches are in advance, and we save time by just routing out the notes carefully. For example, there's notes on both sides of this door, but I'll just grab the notes on one side now, because I know I'm coming around to the other side later when I revisit this room. That kind of stuff used to stress me out so much watching Banjo speedruns, like seeing them leave a jiggy alone and then come back and grab it later. Very stressful, but optimal. I do find it cool they let you fly in this little section. There's a fly pad under that whip crack there, and there's lots of cool things to beak bomb and stuff like that. You do have to break the whip crack before you can use the fly pad, so that's eggs or gold feathers that you need to do that. Also, I don't know why, but I really like this thing where you peck a window and then flutter back onto the windowsill very quickly. Cool little bit of speed tech. There's also a cool little bit where you take damage in a cutscene to gain movement. So we're going to have the cauldron activation cutscene, but during that I'm going to get hit by this present, and then Banjo can sort of just run and jump around in the cutscene. That happens in vanilla Banjo-Kazooie too, but it's cool that it still happens here. Alright, so with the lair pretty much done, we make our way up to Grunty, grabbing these 4 notes that I skipped strategically before. And then I couldn't really find any good way to skip doing this section the intended way, so you really are just creeping along these floorboards trying to get through Grunty's bedroom. It's really weird. I don't know how exactly they programmed this, and breaking this would be key to saving a lot more time in the run. Both because it would, save actual time, but also because this section is really easy to get caught on, and it can destroy your run, and you're like over 20 minutes into the run at this point. We're essentially right at the end. So I remember doing attempts at this. I was really just trying to get an okay run up to the bedroom and then just hope that I got through creeping on these floorboards successfully. I remember having a lot of runs die to this. That's pretty much the 100% speedrun done. I really would recommend giving this one a go. It's a short little fun banjo category to sink your teeth into. There's definitely time to save on my 22:13, so you'd have good luck there. But realistically, if you want something new, you could also route out any percent and have a go at that. Alright, so we're moving on to looking at the tool-assisted speedrun now, and the run we're going to look at is my any percent Taz in 547. In fact, I'm releasing this for Christmas this year, so I only just finished this Taz yesterday, and it's really exciting to get to talk about it so soon. Now, I know a lot of people are sort of interested in how Tazs are made, so I actually streamed the entire process of making this Taz from start to finish. I've got a couple of highlights on my Twitch page, so I'll link those in the description. Just keep in mind, if you're looking at that time, which is about 6 hours to make the entire Taz, this is what we call a low optimization tool-assisted demonstration, or LOTAD. So it's not designed to be as optimal as a normal Taz would be, just to give you an idea of what a normal route would look like. If this Taz is 547, you might expect a fully optimized Taz to be sort of in the more mid to low 5 range. But actually making a fully optimized Taz of something like Banjo takes weeks and weeks and probably months and months of dedication. I know the 100% Taz took several years to make. And if I tried to do that here, we'd be waiting till next Christmas to see this. I'll also be linking just the normal Taz in the description without me pausing it everywhere to talk about what's happening. Feel free to check that out before this if you want to just have a visual of what the run looks like. So I guess the main question to answer is, how do we get 8 jiggies from this level so quickly? And in fact, you wouldn't just need 8 jiggies, you would definitely need these 80 notes, because there's 3 jiggies which are hardlocked behind this note door here. How do we do it? Now, I'd love to say there's a way to sequence break into level 2, but that's not really the case. You need this warp on Banjo's bed to appear, and as far as I can tell, the warp doesn't seem to be here. Even if you sort of look out of bounds in this map, it doesn't happen. I did try like zooming around out of bounds and like checking out underneath Banjo's bed, seeing like, is the warp just stored somewhere else around here, but does not seem to be the case at all. In fact, it seems to be a completely different map that you load into where the warp is here. In fact, they also have this little bit with Leaky, who seems to be blocking off behind an invisible wall up towards Grunty's lair, and Leaky even points this out if you talk to him. But if you glitch past that wall, well, nothing really happens either. I was hoping there might be like a beta unused warp here to Grunty's lair, but you just sort of drop off into the void here. So it looks like we're getting 8 jiggies on this first level. Except, hold on. We void out into Mumbo's mountain for some reason. Now this is not too surprising that we void out into a level, because that's how voiding out works in a normal Banjo-Kazooie game. If you're just playing in Mumbo's Mountain and you happen to void out, you will go back to the start of that level, whatever level you're in this case Mumbo's Mountain. Or if you do it in Grunty's lair, you just go back to whatever room you came from in Grunty's lair. So it looks like what's happened is they built Whoville using Mumbo's Mountain as a base and just sort of added extra rooms and bits and pieces to it. So if you void out from Whoville, you just void out here. And it turns out that pretty much everything from Mumbo's Mountain is still here normally. And that means a very quick 8 jiggies we can grab. There are a couple of small differences. For example, this bit here, they appear to have just put a jiggy here for some reason. I think this might be Pad's jiggy that Congo normally gives you. So that is a quick one to grab. The only awkward thing is that once you've grabbed it, your camera is like really messed up. I think this has to do with the fact that, well, they're skipping the jiggy jig and they've got the text box, so they're clashing in some weird way where you lose proper camera control. But yeah, it's pretty hard to play after this, and you can't press the C buttons or the R button to change the camera at all. Of course, once you got the 2 jiggies which do trigger a text box, you can just void out or die or something to get the camera back to normal. The other really weird change they've made is in the conga section. Conga's just floating in the air there, but they've added 2 different trees for some reason. I really don't know why this has happened, but you can still do the whole Chimpy section pretty normally. If you do go through and use a witch switch or something, you can see it's still tied to that stuff in Grunty's lair. This just spawns the logo jiggy, for example, there. And this is just a side effect of them reusing the assets from the original game to make the hack. You're not really supposed to be in Mumbo's Mountain right now. Speaking of reusing assets, we can see that instead of huts, we have lovely presents to smash here. Alright, so now let's look at what we can do to leave Mumbo's Mountain. The most obvious thing would be just go on this exit pad, but the weird thing is that brings you to a slightly different version of this logo room in Grunty's lair. This is actually right near the end of the game normally, so this would be a great place to warp to and make the Taz much faster. Only issue is, this is not the real logo room. There's no warps coming out of here at all, so you're pretty much stuck. You could try and void out by doing a clip or something, but if you void out, guess where you come back? The same exact logo room. So there's no real point to exiting Mumbo's, and if you did, it's almost just like a soft lock or something. Also, nothing really interesting happens if you go into Mumbo's skull. It's just a normal room, and he will actually turn you into the termite rather than giving you a jiggy if you transform. And the last little place to check is Ticker's Tower. So we'll head in here. And we're back in Whoville. So this is a really convenient way to just quickly zip between Mumbo's Mountain and Whoville. In fact, where it puts us is right in front of Naughty's house, I guess. And this is where you pay the 8 jiggies to open up Grunty's lair. So the route's going to look like, go into Mumbo's Mountain by clipping out of Banjo's house, get a really quick 8 jiggies in there, go into Ticker's Tower to get towards Naughty, and then just pay the 8 jiggies. Then we get straight into Grunty's lair. Now the last thing to talk about with this run is bit clips. So Banjo-Kazooie has a glitch called bit clips where there are very, very small gaps in the floor that you can fall through. That's all you really need to know for this video, but I will link this video explaining bit clips in the description as well. Alright, so now we'll move on to looking at the Taz itself. We start the Taz with this fairly long intro cutscene. Unfortunately, you can't skip it, but the very first thing we're going to see in a Taz is an example of a bit clip to get out of Banjo's house. Just a quick note with Banjo Taz's, bit clips are floating point position precise, so we actually use a script to put Banjo in the correct position for bit clips. It's a little bit cheeky, but it saves just having to spend a whole bunch of time actually making the Taz. Everything you see here should be actually possible to do though. So we'll skip through this text here and we'll get onto Banjo's carpet. Basically he's jump and ground pound through. As I said, there's a very, very, very tiny gap in the floor that Banjo can fall through if you move fast enough. So now we're in Mumbo's Mountain itself. There's a jiggy straight ahead of us here that we can grab, and then we're just going to go and grab the rest of the jiggies. We need 8 jiggies total, and there's normally 10 in Mumbo's Mountain. Given that Conga pads and hitting Conga himself are pretty much locked out, well, we know what 8 jiggies we need. So we're just going to go up here and grab Stonehenge Jiggy and then make our way down towards Chimpy. You'll notice, as I said before, the camera is completely messed up, and that has something to do with the first time Jiggy grabbing text. Fair to say this was pretty difficult to Taz with the camera kind of acting like this. But we'll jump past Conga's tree, we'll get the orange for Chimpy, and then we'll go and feed Chimpy the orange, grabbing Chimpy's Jiggy in the process. Now, once we grab this Jiggy, rather than walking back to the start of the level, it's easiest just to bit clip straight out, and that voids us out and puts us back to the start here. The other little benefit of bit clipping there is that it does set the camera back up normally, so that we can just play without a funky camera the whole time. So now we're going to make our way up the top of the hill, and we're going to be breaking these huts. We don't need notes or anything, so we're just going to break these normally. We'll grab the Jiggy and Mumbo's eye and just continue breaking the huts here. One really important thing was grabbing enough eggs, so I currently have 4 eggs in my inventory, which is just enough to shoot all the eggs into Jinjo and finish that off. When we grab that Jinjo, when it spawns the Jiggy, you actually have to wait for the Jinjo to leave the screen before you can grab the Jiggy. That's why I've left it without grabbing it there, and we just grab these last 3 Jiggies on our way out. Alright, so we go into Ticker's Tower here, but as we know, this warps us back to this little area where we're going to pay Naughty 8 jiggies to spawn the Christmas tree. Alright, so the Christmas tree is now spawning in here. We could walk back to Banjo's house, but it's actually much faster to reset the console here and then just load back into the file. The game auto-saves every time it changes rooms, so that cutscene does auto-save the game. So the warp appears on Banjo's bed, and now we get a very lengthy cutscene before going up to Grunty's lair. And basically we just have to climb this very, very big mountain to get up to Grunty's lair here. Nothing much to this apart from just cutting corners really tight like this one here. So as I mentioned earlier, once you enter Grunty's lair, she puts Banjo in jail pretty much straight away. I wanted to see if there's a way to avoid this. Alright, so once you spawn in, you get these two gruntlings sort of attacking you into the loading zone to the jail. And you can sort of move around a little bit and peck them, but more often than not you do hit the loading zone. I did manage to kill the two gruntlings once, and you do get a little bit of movement, except as soon as you move just the tiniest bit, Banjo will sort of void out to the jail there. You can sort of do a big jump, but you also hit a void zone there as well. You can sort of look around this section now that you killed these enemies. You can see Grunchy there with the presents and stuff, and you can see the doorway up to the rest of the lair. Now I did actually try hacking myself out of that area restricted to, but pretty much there's loading zones everywhere around this room which send you to jail anyway. In fact, even if you do manage to make it to a door somehow, the loading zones into those doors don't actually exist in this room. So you can walk all the way in there and nothing really happens. And that happens on all loading zones in the room, unfortunately. You might also be wondering what happens if you void out, like if you go too far out of bounds. Last time it sent us to Mumbo's Mountain, but if you void out from here, it literally just crashes the game. And that happens no matter what, wherever you are in Grunty's lair. In fact, this void out behaviour is actually pretty dangerous, because you can completely crash the game just by jumping far enough away from Grunty's tower. If you go past the death zone and hit the void out zone instead, nothing happens. You've just got a game crash and you have to reboot. So with all that, it means we pretty much can't escape actually going to prison as Banjo. None of these loading zones work, so there's no way out of this room apart from going to prison and breaking out. Once we're in prison, I would have liked to have bit clipped out of here somehow, but there's something really weird about the floor in this room. For whatever reason, I couldn't find any bit clip spots to clip through the floor, and I don't really know of any other good way you could clip out of this room, really. So unfortunately, we do have to do the prison escape normally, but I kind of like it because it shows what Grunchy's lair is supposed to be like before we completely break it in the Taz. Alright, so coming back to the Taz itself, we unavoidably go to jail. Then what you have to do to break out of jail is sort of go to the right cell, hit a switch, then come back to the left cell. There's not heaps interesting going on here. Coming up here though has my absolute favourite bit of movement in this Taz. You have to peck these windows to open them, but Banjo's jump isn't really high enough to make it up to the window itself without high jumping. So I peck, but then get hit by the enemy to get up to the window without high jumping. It saves like a little bit of time, but it's just so cool to see it work like that. When we come into this room, we grab a Jiggy, which we don't really need, but really importantly I have to grab an egg on my way up here. That egg will come into play later. These next couple rooms are pretty straightforward, you just climb up the lair. Now next up we have the dining room area. So the intended way to get up through to this next room here is to go through the window. Because if you try and walk straight up to this final room, you're stuck behind these bars here. Now, it's not really a good way to get past these bars. I tried looking for bit clip spots and stuff, but nothing really worked out. If you could, this here is basically the last room of the game, but unfortunately we got to go the intended way through the dining room. But the cool thing about this though is the dining room is one of my favourite ones in the Taz. It's really cool how this works. We jump up here and fly up. You shouldn't be able to fly there. And the reason you shouldn't be able to fly is because there's this whip crack here which should give you damage. But if you stand right on the edge of the fly pad, almost like Nappa Skip or something like that, you can get into flight without being hit. It is incredibly precise to do this. So we're going to get into flight, and you might notice this window here with bars across it. The switch to open these bars is actually pretty close nearby, but it's not really worth hitting it, because we are actually able to clip through this window. So even though it's solid, if we do a well-timed beak bomb, Banjo can get through that tiny gap with enough speed and clip straight out the window. Seriously, that dining room is one of my favourite rooms in the Taz. Anyway, we just climb up the tower, and this sort of brings us to the last section of the lair. When we go into this room, you'll notice it's that same room from before, except this time it's actually fully decked out with notes and loading zones and everything in there. This takes us to the very last room of the lair. Now, normally you go through that note door in front of us and do the sort of grunty Nappa section there, and that would open up this door here at the back of the lair, sort of called the back door. But we're going to be bit clipping past this door. Now, when we saw bit clips before in the run, you might have noticed that Banjo was going to be ground pounding through the floor, and that's because you need enough speed to get through the floor with the bit clip, but of course this completely ruins your mobility out of bounds. Sort of because you're going straight downwards, there's no scope to sort of like flutter around and get past a wall or anything. Now we can bit clip through the floor in front of this door, but we just ground pound through and fall all the way through the level. So we have to find some way to bit clip through but still have mobility on Banjo. Now conveniently doing a bit clip without a ground pound is actually possible, and a good example of this is 810 skip from the normal Banjo-Kazooie any percent Taz. It requires getting a lag frame, but if you can produce a lag frame like we're doing here, then you should be able to jump through and bit clip through the ground without a ground pound. You then just flutter underneath a door like this and you ground pound back up through the ground. That gets you past it. One thing you might notice though is the language is not in English here, and there's a good reason for that. The bit clips through the ground like this only work on the PAL version of the game. So the PAL version was released in like Australia and Europe, and it has a lower frame rate of 50 frames a second rather than 60 frames a second. Or I guess 25 and 30 if you're talking about Banjo. But given this is the NTSC version of the game this hack is based off, bit clipping through the ground just doesn't work like that. The only way we're going to bit clip is to clip off of a higher ground and have a bit more speed falling through the ground. And that ends up being exactly what we do. What we do is we shoot an egg over there, we jump, and then we bit clip through the ground there and get through the door. So that was a lot going on there, but I'll slow it down a little bit. So essentially what's happening here is you're shooting the egg to the left. Now that egg hits this gruntling, which is sort of right here. It's a bit of a hard shot, but if you watch the Taz on its own, you'll be able to hear the gruntling being hit there. Hitting the gruntling is really important because that reliably produces a lag frame, which is exactly what we need. Banjo speeds up with lag, so he just gets through the floor that way. Without a lag frame, you can't do this. Then we jump across from this pole, hit the bit clip spot, and fall straight through. We flutter under the door and ground pound in. Now, I'm going to be really honest here. This bit clip is a tad dodgy, and the reason is because you're jumping across with Banjo. Normally to fall through a floor, you need to completely zero off Banjo's speed so that he's not moving at all. So it's a bit of an open question about whether we could get to this spot and zero off Banjo's speed at the same time. But if that didn't work, it would just be a matter of finding a bit clip spot that's a little bit closer than this and using that instead. So once we've done that, we get through the floor and we hit these presents. And that is the end of the Taz. That's going to be pretty much it for this video here. It's a really cool hack that's worth checking out, so if you're looking for something to do over the holiday season, definitely give it a go. I'm hoping you enjoyed this little window into Banjo-Kazooie speed tech, and I'd highly encourage you to check out some of the videos on my main channel, sort of explaining all that Banjo-Kazooie speed stuff. It's a really deep game, and if I do an episode on it on this channel, it's going to be probably several hours long. Maybe one day we'll do this. But hopefully you enjoyed this for now. Have a great holidays, and I'll catch you next time.